Welcome to the Sales Queen podcast, where we teach women how to turn their skills into sales and monetize their message so they can finally sell with the clarity, confidence, and certainty that they've always wanted to. No longer does the game of sales need to be an old boys club. It's time for you to sell like a queen. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sales Queen podcast. I am here with Blake Guichet, the Crappy Christian podcast. So many of you guys probably already listened to her amazing podcast. I have been a fan. She is a fellow Enneagram 8, just like me. So y'all know this is about to be a powerful, probably very opinionated party. Blake, I'm so honored that we finally get to meet and just excited for our talk today. Thanks for being on the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, heck yeah. Okay, so for people who somehow don't know who you are, why don't you kind of start with telling us the scope of the history of the Crappy Christian podcast? Was this always your vision? How did you get here? And what are some of the things that you talk about on that podcast?
Yeah, this was not my vision for my life. It may have been at one point, and then I really kind of gave up a life of success and hustle and trying to get to the next thing. And I got married young, had kids pretty young, tried to do the whole like small business hustle blogger thing. It just wasn't going anywhere. So I was just like, and God made it very clear, hey, you're trying to elevate your name instead of mine. And so why don't you sit down for a minute? And that was very humbling and interesting to walk through. But I'm so thankful for that season because I had the sweetest days of being a stay-at-home mom. Like, we had the gift of my husband going to work and I got to be a stay-at-home mom and take that time to figure out what was important to me and what matters to me and what kind of work I wanted to be doing. What kind of impact did I want to be making? And how could I use my story in my life to further the kingdom? And yes, like help my family, right? Mm-hmm. It's that give and take of that is honoring God with my life and with my story and with my gifts is the most important thing to me. But also, like, I think a lot of us, I wanted to make money. I wanted to be able to add to our income and help us afford things that we wanted to prioritize. And so Confessions of a Crappy Christian was my 30th birthday present to myself in 2018. And I mean, had no idea what I was doing. Just like, I had a little $20 mic and I would go in our guest closet with one of those little like TV trays and my laptop, and I would interview people, and it took off pretty quickly. The landscape of podcasting has changed pretty significantly in the last 4.5 years. And so when I started, there wasn't a lot of these conversations, like talking about the harder things or the more taboo things. And so I kind of just, is that Enneagram 8 life, like just dove in head first and was like, let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about motherhood. Let's talk about business. And people were really drawn to that. And so in the last 4.5 years, it's gone from being this little baby podcast to a best-selling book. And I was able to retire my husband off of my income and kind of build a life that, oh my gosh, 4.5 years ago, me would look at the life that we live today and be like, I'm sorry, what? Like, how did that happen? So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I love that. Yes. And you do have an amazing book, Confessions of a Crappy Christian. So make sure you guys go online and get that. It will be a huge blessing to your mind, your soul, your spirit. One thing that I wanted to talk a little bit deeper about, because we do have a lot of entrepreneurs and business people that listen to this podcast, is you talk in your book about anti-hustle. And it's one of the first things that you put in your book. Can you explain a little bit more of why you believe that became a theme in your life? And then also how that ended up actually being like a new pathway to blessing, because you did try this before and you did feel like, okay, I got to hustle. We talk about your previous kind of mentor that you looked up to. That's in the news this week too. I don't know if you saw all of that.
So heartbreaking.
But talk to us kind of about what your version of anti-hustle looks like, because it's still working hard, but just with maybe a different lens.
Yeah, it was learning. It was a lot of things, right? It was like I just said, whose name was I trying to elevate? Whose glory was I working for? I don't think God has any problem elevating the names of people who want to elevate his name. But when you're trying to just get in the spotlight and make it about you, like, I think that you can be traditionally successful in that, but it's going to be really empty. And that's going to be, you're going to be walking on really thin ice. It's just, I think it's a dangerous path to take. And so really had to strip all of that away. You mentioned, I mean, I was definitely learning from idolizing people that I shouldn't have been. And that's not a slam against them. It's just that the gospel was not the center of their message. And I had to kind of have that wake up call that I was so swept up in their influence that I had allowed my priorities to get out of whack. And so I wasn't being the mom that I wanted to be, and I wasn't being the wife I wanted to be. And I was so freaking tired all the time, because God created us for rest. And there's so much scripture about the importance of rest and how much rest is obedience, and rest is its own kind of work. And so I really had to, I mean, it was truly a stripping down of everything that I believed in, everything that I was like trying to work for. I was trying to blog at the time, and it was gaining zero traction, and like trying to show up on Instagram and trying to do all these things and network. And I literally, it was the definition of being in a hamster wheel and just not running at 100 miles an hour and never going anywhere. And so I eventually, like, my physical health really crashed and burned. My marriage was not doing really well. I did not feel like I was doing enough as a mother, and I wasn't making any money. It wasn't like I was crushing it and could be like, this is the trade-off, which that's a whole different conversation, but just none of it was working. And so a lot of the pushback I got when I I had my own season of, I dropped off the internet, like just went completely dark, and then came back with this kind of message of, hey, I think we've traded hard work, which is biblical, for hustle, which isn't, because hustle believes that you have to do it yourself, that you're the hero of your own story, that you need to like step on people to get where you need to get, that success is a measurable metric financially. And I just abandoned all of that and was like, no, like, let's look at what scripture says about hard work, and what does that look like, and how do we honor God with our gifts and steward what he's given us responsibly. And it was insane, the response, because I think, and I was speaking to women specifically, we were so tired and just, I think a lot of us didn't see a better way, because this was the only way that was being shown to us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It was the only option.
Yeah. And I think that's why I connected with you too. You know, we're just meeting here, but like, why, when I saw you on a different podcast, I was like, dude, that's like, she's my people, because even to this day, like, it's gotten better, like you're saying, but especially in the Christian world too, like one of my mentors is Real Talk Kim. I don't know if you know who that is. Yeah. And so like, until her, I remember feeling as an Enneagram 8, even before I knew that that was something I could identify myself as, I suppose, just being a bold person. In being raised in ministry, I'm a PK. I was like, am I just wrong for like existing? Like, I'm not a Mary, like, sorry about it. Like, not happening. Should I just be this like subservient, quiet helper? And am I wrong for having this fire and this desire to impact people and to change the world? Right. Or you just have to be a pastor, and that's your only call, you know, to impact people. So what was that like? What's been your history with that? How did you kind of like find your voice? And then the second part of my question too is like, you gained huge traction during the pandemic and stuff too, by being exactly who you were called to be. What were the emotions going on the inside of you that were like, should I stay neutral? Should I be this? Like, how did you find the courage? And why do you think that people latched on to you just being like, here's what it is. Here's who I am.
Yeah.
And how can maybe people be encouraged to do the same thing with who they're supposed to be?
Yeah. So I'm a church kid. I'm not a PK, but I'm a youth group kid, grew up in the church, grew up in, the 90s and 2000s, purity culture, all of that kind of stuff. Have always been a loudmouth, have always been super opinionated, have never in my life have I fit like the traditional mold that was presented for Christian women. Got in trouble a lot, still get in trouble a lot. And spent a lot of my life like hating myself, honestly, hating
Yeah.
myself. Couldn't like tried really hard to water it down and make it more digestible. But even in that, even when I was successful in that, was just I hated myself. Like I
Yeah.
can't even express how much. And so honestly, and people get all twisted about this, but the Enneagram and discovering the Enneagram was a huge part. God used that for so much freedom in my life. And,
Yep.
you know, my copy of The Road Back to You, the first chapter is Enneagram 8. The whole 8 chapter is covered in legitimate like tear stains because I was
Wow.
just bawling, reading somebody like tell me about my life and being
Yeah.
like, wait, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that's just like, I feel like I could shoot fire out of my fingertips sometimes. And like,
Yep.
I have an opinion about everything. And not only do I have an opinion, I can back it up and I can go toe to toe. And I love it. I thrive in that. And just, you're not broken. You're not wrong. Just being able to be like, you're just different.
Yeah.
And I mean, just on a very logistical side, there are more Enneagram 8 males than females. And so that whole throws like a whole wrench in the situation. But so, I mean, I'm pretty vocal about, you can feel however you want about the Enneagram, and I'm going to feel how I want about the Enneagram. And I believe in your discernment and I believe in mine because it made a huge impact in my ability to see myself and understand myself. And also my marriage. Like it helped me understand my husband and see him for who he is and understand his motivations. And then now I can't remember what your second question was.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Sorry.
I think no, you're totally good. I love that. I think the second part is just like, how can you encourage people to use their voice, whatever that is, and kind of like live
you
in
were
their
like,
lane.
how did I like get the confidence to like come out swinging in 2020 and all of that? It's actually a really funny story. Jennifer Allwood is my mentor. And I had come to her at one point and legitimately, this is hysterical to think about now, but said, I'm thinking about, this is early 2020. I don't even think like it's hit the fan yet. Like we're not even in COVID yet. Maybe we are. But I said, I think I'm going to try to make myself more digestible. Right. So this is the plight of us, our whole lives. It's like, how can I make myself smaller to make people more comfortable? And then therefore maybe they'll want me. And so I was like, I think I'm going to just try to like take it safe, stick with the party line. And she didn't respond to me for a really long time, which is the worst. And she was thinking and praying and discerning. And I'm so thankful for that. She didn't respond to me. And she responds back and she's like, I've been praying about this all day. And I just keep hearing the words double down. And I was like, okay. I was like, I'm going to take that and do my own praying and discerning. And as I did that, I just you put it so perfectly. I felt like God was like, I want you to show up as you are. Show up with your opinions on politics, on theology, on culture, on personal issues. Just show up and say the things. And I know 2020 was a really hard year for a lot of people. So sometimes I feel kind of weird saying this, but 2020 was a huge year for me, a huge year for my family. I think people felt represented in like what I was saying, that it was just kind of like jokingly, my Instagram bio is like, I make a living off of just saying what everybody else is thinking, and some of that, I think all of that boils down to like the ability to do that boils down to where your identity is. Is your identity in the algorithm, in your engagement? Is it in the feedback that you're getting? Is it in what people that are going to see your content and then you're going to have to like run into them in real life? Is that where your identity is? Or is your identity like legitimately rooted in what God says about you and what the cross accomplished for you? And I realize that is like such a Sunday school answer, but I really believe it's the only answer to doing this and it not destroying you, because people are going to have thoughts. They're going to have opinions. People suck. Christians and non-Christians are so mean and so opinionated. And if you let that get in your world, it will tear you apart.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, Blake, because I'm sure offline we could share stories back and forth. Just like even Christians, sometimes I'm just like, can you just like, my husband and I call it didn't ask. We're like, actually didn't ask, like,
Yep.
didn't ask for your opinion. So can
And
you
I
just not?
lead with that these days. Like if like a lot of the time I'm like, hey, I'm telling you this and I love you, but I don't want your opinion. I don't need your
Yeah.
feedback. You follow me. I don't follow you. If I wanted your opinion,
Come
I'd follow
on.
you on Instagram. Like,
Mm.
and I've been on one about this a little bit lately on Instagram, but just I mean, Christians are embarrassing me. Like they are embarrassing me. Our
Wow.
complete inability to just put your phone down. Your negative opinion, you don't have to make every negative opinion you have be heard across
Mm.
the internet. What are you accomplishing? How are you building people up? How are you walking in love? How do you look like Jesus? You don't, but they think they
Literally.
do.
Yeah.
They think they do.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to sit here and be like, I do this perfectly and I look like
Yeah.
Jesus. That's
Yeah.
not the case at all. But it's just, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely 500% million Jillian. Absolutely. Yes. Can't stand it. So like I was raised in like Pentecostalville where like women bring their own flags and tambourines. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and then of course they're right in front of the camera. And I'm like, absolutely not,
Yeah.
Dolores. Like you, no. So, and you know, like we see the people that are like conference jumpers and all these different things. And I'm not like name calling. I'm just saying like, if you're hearing this podcast today, like God says that it's faith plus corresponding action. And I think we have people on both sides. There's people that are like all action, all my own strength, the hustle culture, right? And then you have people over here that are just like, what's the word of the day for me, you know, with a rent a profit or whatever. And then you're like not doing anything with it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully you guys can be listening to this podcast and thinking like, okay, like what's the last thing that God told me to do? What am I hearing? Like, what do I feel like I'm put on this earth to make an impact with? And that's what you're going to see blessing with. But if you don't create momentum in the first place, like God could be sitting there trying to bless you and you're literally not taking the ball, you know, down the
Right.
field. Like, sorry, God's not going to make the touchdown for you, if you will. So as a segue to that, I was looking at your website and I saw too that you have courses and programs and a community. You know, I'd love to kind of get a little bit more into the business side of what a lot of people don't see. They're like, oh, you just made a podcast and you just show up and everything's perfect. And that's how you're making, you know, millions of dollars. And it's just so whatever. So, talk to us a little bit about like you started with the podcast and now it's developed into some other income streams, other ways that you help people. What was that process like? Cause you came from, you know, having done some business stuff, but like,
Mm-hmm.
and then you said you have a mentor too. What's that process been like to develop and decide what other offerings you have? And, you know, oh, I want to create a community. I want to do this. Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So a year into having the podcast, within the first year, I grew 10,000 followers. So I went from being like under 1,000 to having over 10,000 in the year and grew my email list really successfully, had monetized a few different like affiliate kind of outlets. And a lot of the messages that I was getting was from women who wanted to do something similar with their blog or with their podcast or, you know, with their social networking. I by then had joined Red Aspen, which is like press on nails and mascara and makeup and stuff. And so I started just kind of decided to start putting together a course because I knew it wasn't realistic for me to help everybody. And I did know from like my mentor at the time that was a really great revenue stream. I mean, 10 out of 10 recommend that people create courses because it's a lot of work on the front end, but then it is essentially passive income after that outside of launching and opening if you choose to not have it be evergreen. But so Run Your Race is the name of my course. It's a course for creators and small business owners. And the focus of it is how to do these things and not burn out and honor God with your gifts and keep him at the center because it is so easy to get distracted and so easy to shift your priorities out of order. And so, I mean, the first time we opened it, I remember being like, I'll be so excited if like 3 people buy this course, you know, that's how everybody feels when they open something.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, actually, I was actually working at a church at the time. Like had a full-time job, office job, as their like communications manager or whatever. And the income from the first launch of Run Your Race made what I made in a year at the church.
Oh
and
my
so
gosh.
that was when I was able to quit my job, and start doing all of this full time, sign my book contract like a month later. So that was another source of income. And then I think a year after that, started coaching for creators, which I like jokingly say is run your race on crack. So it's hand in hand. Like we talk on Voxer, I have office hours. We do one-on-one calls, and like, let's make an action plan. Let's break through the mindset barriers that you are, fighting against. Cause more often than not, people are just their own worst enemy, and they're just, holding themselves back from doing these things that they are very clearly gifted in and that people will pay them to do. And so I run 2 rounds of that a year now, which again, another great source of income, but then also is making an impact. We've launched multiple podcasts and book proposals and businesses locally and just like digitally and out into the world. And so, I'm a huge proponent of diversifying your income, of having multiple streams. It's another thing that I kind of like teach people how to do, but it is more kind of like background to like the podcast and Instagram and the book and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Very cool. Who would you say is like your avatar? Are you just coaching women? And what types of businesses? You said some of them are local. Like, so are you training people in online businesses as well as brick and mortar, or like what? What's kind of your avatar?
The focus is more on like social media, email, like building your email list, getting a brand that, is going to be attractive to people, getting your my previous job was in graphic design and website design. And so I'm able to like kind of help people with that on the back end, creating multiple revenue streams. So it's stuff that if you own in real life, like brick and mortar business, is really helpful to have in the online, like have an online presence, or if you're in the online world, it just kind of helps you bulk that up. So, I've worked with everything from, there's a local like boutique, therapy center that opened that like we worked together. And now she's like, in a year already opening her second location, and like has been voted like the best in Baton Rouge multiple times. And then I've worked with a ton of real estate agents and photographers and influencers and authors and podcasters. It's just anybody that's creating content of some kind, whether that's your primary goal, or if it's a really helpful like side thing. Cause I think everybody should be. I think if you're a dog walker, you should have an online presence.
Yep.
And so, it does make it a little difficult to like nail down a real like avatar with firm edges, because if you want to show up online and you want to like have your business not run and ruin your life, Run Your Race is a good fit.
What a concept. Not
right.
Ruin Your Life. Is that why we got into business? Yeah.
Right.
I love it. What do you think, if you could distill down in your experience, what are the key points of what makes somebody take off online or successful online? Are there like major things that you feel like are key differentiators that make somebody stand out above the rest? Because I think a lot of people are trying, but they either get overwhelmed or they do put in a lot of consistency, a lot of effort, and things just aren't kind of popping off. So what are kind of your keys to what you found make somebody poke through the rest and successful?
I do think that it's not going to be everybody. And I think some people aren't willing to say that. Like some people aren't willing to say, hey, like not everybody's gonna, and that's annoying to hear from somebody with like a relatively large platform or whatever. I just don't think it's going to be everybody. I don't think that that's what God has for everybody. And I think it's weighing that and discerning that and asking God to like, is this actually what you have for me? Also, like not despising small beginnings, and that being where you stay. Like if you have a community of like 1,000 women that are invested, that's 1,000 people. Like, that's a ton of people. So like, I don't want to act like getting to 100,000 followers is the only way that having a platform matters or having a ministry matters. There are quote unquote smaller ministries making massive, massive impacts in their communities and online. But I do think some of the things that hold people back is it's really scary to show up and actually be yourself, not curate it super perfectly. Like, yeah, like I still curate my content. It's not just a free for all, but being willing to be vulnerable about like actual vulnerable things, not like curated vulnerability, not the like, oh, messy motherhood, where everybody's motherhood is messy. We got it. Like, what are you struggling with? And how can I see myself in you? And how can you offer value? I think a lot of people think they can just show up and share about their life. And sometimes like there's no takeaway for people. And so
that's huge.
Like what value are you offering? And that's not to say that you have to only offer value. You know, like it's this mix, right? Like this, you're trying to constantly like have these scales even out between, I want to offer value. I want there to be something for people to show up and take away from this. And also I want them to know me and because then you're more likely to listen, you know, so it just kind of like all starts working together. I would say that's the primary thing. Like, that's why I don't follow a lot of people, because I follow them for a little while and I'm like, okay, there's literally no way your life is this perfect.
Yeah.
And all it's doing is making me feel like crap about my life. So I'm going to opt out.
Yeah. How did you become the storyteller that you are today? Have you always been like a writer? I don't know if it's like our personality, because that's kind of how I am too. But like, I think some people struggle with, I don't know, cutting through the noise on social media because they don't know how to storytell. And I'll just speak for myself, and I'd love to hear your opinion. Like, that's the way that I see the world. Like, if I'm driving, God's going to speak to me about something, or I could be on a walk, and the way that I see that person interact with the person, my brain creates a story about it. And I don't know if it's like my teaching gift or whatever. So like, what's that been like for you? And then have you helped anybody through that process of like, hey, you got to like be more present and start noticing things to actually like regurgitate information and provide value? Because people think they are providing value. And I'm like, secondhand embarrassment, like that was a pointless Instagram story and you just embarrassed yourself. I don't know. So yeah, your thoughts on that.
Rest is such a huge part of that, right? Like I hear God and he teaches me things, and get like most of the time, if I'm being totally honest, and I am not like this perfect Christian that reads my Bible every morning. I'm just not. Sometimes I wish I was, or I'm not. But I do spend my mornings with God. I don't open social media until 9 a.m. And honestly, a lot of the time I hear from him in that time, allowing my mind to be still and kind of extra plugged into him. And then I've got something to run with all day, honestly, you know? And so I that's a huge part of it. And I look, you know, telling my story, I look back at when I was hustling and really like running myself into the ground, and I wasn't offering value because I didn't have any offer to value because I was freaking exhausted. You know what I mean?
That's good.
I think that's a huge part of it. I think I know exactly what you're saying, where you watch somebody's stories and you're like, that didn't need to be on the internet. Like that could have stayed on your close friends list at minimum. And I think a lot of the time it's a lack of purpose. Like, why are you here?
That's good. That's good.
Why are you here? Because you want to be seen, or are you here because you have something to say? Because I know what it's like to feel like, okay, I need to show up on Instagram today because I didn't show up yesterday, so I need to show up today. I had to get to a point where I was like, I don't have anything to say. So I'm not like, I'm gonna wait until I got something to say. And then I'm gonna say it, you know? And so I think it's this like rigmarole of like, I need to show up, I need to offer value, but you're not offering value because you're tired, because you're not listening to God. And it's just like becomes this monster that takes over. And then all of a sudden you're that person that people are like sending each other your Instagram story and being like, what is she talking about? Like, what is you know, like that's how that happens. And that's still like, we shouldn't be talking about each other. Go back. But
no, I hear you. It's okay. We're human here. We're normal people. So, anyways, I saw this meme the other day, and it was so two of my best friends are African. They're awesome, Nigerian and Cameroonian, and their family culture, one of them's getting married next month. And so we've had lots of discussions about family and
Yeah.
opinions and getting married and involvement and all these things, right? So we were laughing the other day because she sent me this video, and they were talking about people need to be more embarrassed. Like we need to bring embarrassment back for ourselves about like, honey, you need to have like a sense of awareness that like, like don't like,
Yeah.
you need to be a little more embarrassed. And so that's just what that reminded me of. Like some people,
Yes.
it's just like, and I think like that, maybe that actually leads back to just mentorship, or maybe you didn't have the father or mother in your life or close friends. Like maybe we're living in such a superficial world that everybody's just doing this all the time to try and
Right.
get
Or
the
are you
next viral
surrounded by
video.
yes people?
Yeah.
Like you're I think the main problem is we surround ourselves with people that just tell us yes. And like you said, like clap for us when we perform, that aren't pushing us towards self-evaluation and discernment, and or like you create that world too. Like if you're not willing to hear a no, then you're not going to have people in your life that are going to tell you the hard stuff. And I don't know if you have this experience, but I mean, there are definitely an added, I know. I love that we're both keep being like, should I say this? Like there are definitely people that I have lost in my life because I, with a loving heart and with a kind disposition, tried to tell them the truth, and they didn't want to hear the truth.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to hear what made them comfortable. And that's not even just in the online world. But then you're stuck with an Enneagram 8 who's like, I mean, I told you how I felt. Like, that doesn't mean I don't love you. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere, but this ain't working. And they don't like that.
How have you learned to balance that? Because I know that's something in like, as I matured, I definitely look back at some moments and I'm like, ooh, like,
Same.
Girl, you definitely said it. Like, should you have? I don't know. So what's that process been? And what would be like your motivation, or I guess advice for people that are like, hey, I'm still walking that road? Because I think some people are over here and they're like, I can't say anything, Enneagram 2s, everyone's gonna leave me if I just like say my voice. And then you've got 8s that are like, burn the ships, don't care, whatever, that maybe also need some healing on that behalf, where it's like, so what's been that like maturity process for you? Maybe you're way more perfect than me, but yeah, what's been that process, or like what goes on in your head when you're coaching yourself of like, this is the right time, this is the right way, and then like, hey, check yourself, this is going to be hurtful for people?
Yeah, I think motivation is huge. Like, why am I saying this to this person? Is it because I'm frustrated by these decisions that they're making? Or is it because I truly think they need somebody to speak into this area of their life? That's for me a huge part of it. Like, am I just annoyed by watching you make bad choices? Or do I feel like I have earned the right to speak into this in your life? And another thing is like, do I even think they'll hear it? Are they asking? Like, are people asking for your input, or are you just giving it? Because that's, and I think that there are times where we need to give our input and it's not asked for, but, and then also like being okay with them not being receptive to it is a huge thing for me. If I have to get to a point where I'm like, okay, if I say this to this person, I feel like that's the right choice, and they don't want it, will I be okay? Like, will I be like, all right, then burn the bridge, I don't want to talk to you ever again, we're done? Or can I be like, okay, I love you just the same, and I support you, and then it gets murky, right? Because if somebody's making like truly destructive decisions, then you're stuck in the really awkward place of like, I'm not going to support you in this. I'm not going to act like this is a good choice. I'm not going to affirm this in your life. It's just messy. Relationships are messy.
Yeah. I hear you 100%. Okay. I have a couple more things I want to ask you about, like genuinely, as if no one else is going to benefit from this other than me. So you talk about, in your book, church hurt, and we can talk about my story offline. But that's been something that, I was a pastor at a church. I've had some interesting, anything that you think could happen, girl, has happened. Anything has happened, right? So, and what I want to connect that to for us specifically is like Enneagram 8s, control and betrayal are like the two biggest things that like, if we deal with, we're like, it's like, yeah, we can like act strong and do things, but that's what like disarms like our strong, right? So like, can you talk a little bit about how you've navigated, whether it's in the church or whether it's just friendships or relationships or whatever, like how have you navigated still being strong or setting boundaries or just working through those times when like there was very real hurt and betrayal and you just felt like, oh my gosh, I like let my armor down and you acted like a complete you know what to me. And now like I have to deal with not becoming like resentful and bitter or letting that seep into my identity, and now I'm just a hard person. Like there's so many things that I think can manifest when someone hurts you in that way that you're hurt the most. So can you talk a little bit about that and just walk people through how you've navigated that journey?
Yeah, this is a huge kind of undercurrent of my whole book because I wrote it right kind of on the tail end of the season, just hurt after betrayal after betrayal. And I look back at writing this and I'm so thankful that I wrote it when I did, because I think people need to see that like raw, wounded, I am in the midst. Like I am in the midst. I am in the trenches of trying to heal and forgive and move on and find truth and stand on truth. And it's so interesting now, 2 years later, I wrote the book 2.5 years ago, and I've gotten to see so much healing. And there's nothing in it that I don't agree with anymore, but I read it and I'm like, whoo, homegirl was hurting, you know what I mean? But I lost like 4 really important, impactful friendships in like a 2.5 year span in like bomb drops. It wasn't like, oh, we're just kind of not friends anymore. It was these huge blowout, like fallouts. And a whole group of them were at the church that I went to, and then like very clearly felt like we weren't supposed to leave this church. This is where we're supposed to be. And so having to continue to like show up and basically like see these people that had just destroyed me from the inside out, kind of like you were saying, I actually give an analogy in the book of like having built my nice little fortress and then you let certain people in it and then they set it on fire. And then you're just kind of sitting amongst the rubble. And the heart of my response to that is like, first of all, I think what held me back from healing was trying to act like everything was fine. I was not willing to be like, yo, these people took me out at the knees. These people hurt me. And that's it. It doesn't even have to be a slight on their character. You don't even need to assign an intention. Like people can do things that hurt you and they genuinely didn't mean to hurt you, but that doesn't mean they didn't hurt you. Right? Like that's the trade-off. Is I don't need to assign intention to your action, but I can tell you that what you did messed me up for a long time. And so I really would say that I kind of went into hibernation for the most part. I'm not going to say that's the healthiest coping mechanism either. Like I haven't decided if I like, if that was the right choice, if I needed to like lick my wounds and heal and stay under the radar. I do think now, like, I think I hermited a little longer than maybe God meant me to. I do think that, like, I know I've talked about rest a lot, but I think between like running the marathon of getting the book out and working on my business and building this, like world, business or whatever, and being a mom and being a wife and being probably the most hurt I'd ever been in my life, honestly. These friendship losses were worse than any boyfriend breakup I had ever had. And so it was a lot of therapy, like a lot of therapy. And a lot, and then that opens up older wounds that you're like, oh, this hurt me because I never healed this wound and somebody just stuck their finger in an unhealed wound. But the 2021 and 2 were just immense amounts of healing and resting, not trying, like, I think Enneagram 8s, especially, we have this need, like, just get back on our feet, get back on the horse, get back out there. And I just for once needed to not get back on the horse. Like I needed to just be for a minute and be with God. And also honestly, like figure out what I believed and what I didn't, and what, in my life is still serving a purpose and what's not, and how can I move things around. And so now it's so funny because it's February of the new year. And I very clearly felt like God was like, all right, January 1, we're getting back in the game. Like we're getting back out there. And it's the first time in my life, honestly, that January 1 was truly significant. I've always kind of been like, I mean, it's a new calendar. It's like not, like it's not really a new year, new you. But this year I was like, all right, like we're getting out there. So I like started talking to people at the gym and like talking to people at the church. And I've made some friends. We actually have plans this weekend for the first time in forever.
Come on.
So I think now I'm on the other side of being like there was a time where I was like, I never want to make a new friend again in my life.
Yeah.
Ever.
Of course.
I don't need them. I don't want them. It's pointless. All it brings is pain.
Yeah.
And I think now I'm in then I was in a position to be like shoulder to shoulder with people who were hurting and be like, yeah, me too. Me too. I don't have the answers. I can tell you what I'm doing and you can do it if you want to. And now I've kind of gotten not to the other side, but a little bit where I'm like,
yeah,
hey, it does get better. Hey, you won't feel this way forever. And that's really, really sweet to get to experience that as well.
Yeah. Love that. Can't wait to talk about that more offline. Just like same. But I think what you said is really important, Blake, because some people never get to that place. Some people never get to the other end of the finish line or even like seeing the break through the trees, because that hurt does become how they like their identity and it becomes their significance. You know what I mean? Like if you don't keep just taking like, okay, one step today. And I think a huge part I can say for me was having just like one safe person in my life. Like for me, that was like my family. I had at least, 2 or 3, 4 people that I was like, okay, even if I'm a hermit and I never go anywhere else, I don't even want to go to Walmart because of who I might see from whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I hear all these voices talking about me behind my back, having an opinion. I'm like, I literally just need to like calm my freaking nervous system to where I'm not in fight or flight 24 actual 7.
Okay. So we are actually the same person.
Literally, and actually re-traumatizing myself every time I go to church to see all these people and pretending like everything's fine. So like just taking a break for like 3 seconds, for me, I, this whole time period, like almost same time period as you. And then I'll tell you more later, but I got done competing for Miss USA during election week of 2020. So smart. So smart. Like that was so fun. And not winning Miss USA, I came home, I had $0 in my bank account. God told me to break up with my boyfriend of 2 years and I left my church all in a 24-hour period. And literally the Lord was like still it hits me. The Lord was like, will you trust me? Like, will you surrender? And it was the hardest thing. I literally took all my social media apps off my phone. I just like ghosted for like 2 full weeks, which doesn't sound like a huge time, but it was like through Thanksgiving and I'm feeling all these emotions and I'm just feeling like a complete failure. And I was like, God, like you gave me this call on my life, but everything's freaking failing. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm being obedient. And God's like, well, I want everything, And so at that place, a complete surrender. It was super tough. And I don't have a fairy tale story, but I will say from that moment, it was a complete turning point in my life. My business started booming. I met my husband 3 weeks later. We found out there was a huge scandal in the church that came out a month and a half later that God was protecting me from. Like I had my letter written to our pastors ready to like leave, and God saved me from all of that. Like it was insane. But now I look at that, 2 years later too. And I'm just like, but God, like I'm healed. I don't have to walk in that hurt and let that be my identity where just every 5 seconds, but I can acknowledge that it happened so that I can have that lens to serve and love and help more people, and unfortunately just, I'm not perfect, or anything, but like I see some people that, or that even becomes their business, and now it's just a hurt club, a bunch of females that are like, I don't need it, whatever. And I'm just like,
they're just bleeding out on each other,
and I'm just like, gosh, it doesn't have to be that way. So I want to end on a high note after going really. So you said, some of the, those things have kind of set you up. Now you're coming out of the woods, things like that. What's kind of on the horizon for you, that you're excited about, whether it's in business or like you said, relationships? What are you excited about? And then how would you like people to connect with you in addition to what we'll put in the show notes?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I alluded to earlier that my husband left his corporate job last year. He was able to kind of come home off of he was able to come home off of my income and spend the last 8 months. He's worked in an office job for 20 years and he was miserable and it was the worst. And so, he just started his own business and is like working for himself and doing the whole entrepreneur thing. And so I'm really excited to get to take a little bit of a break. Like I'm really excited to I think for anybody with a successful business, there are parts of it that you don't love necessarily. There are parts of it that you do that, serve a purpose, that offer value, but like, it's not your favorite. And so I'm getting to kind of back off on some of those things and bump up on some of the things that I love podcasting. I would sit in podcast interviews all day, every day, if that could just be like the only job that I had. And I love coaching and I love all of that stuff as well. But this is where I started. This is what I love. And so, him having his own business and therefore bringing in his own income is kind of alleviating some of that. And so I'm really excited to just create the content that I want to create and have incredible conversations with people, continue to do the coaching and the courses, not feel so stressed about those things, kind of just like let those be what they are. And just like making friends again is real weird when you took 2 years off of like talking to people. We live in Louisiana, so it's Mardi Gras. And so we're like going to a parade with some people this weekend, and it's like very outside of our norm, but I'm excited about it. So it's a cool, like transitional season that our family's in right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for being open and sharing your heart. And it was just awesome getting to know you. And hopefully this isn't our last conversation. I know people are going to be so blessed by this. And so thanks so much for being on, and everybody, we'll see you in next week's episode.